Good evening. My name is Hope Coulter. I'm the Interim Director of the Hendricks Murphy Programs in Literature and Language and a member of the English Department here at Hendricks College. I'd like to welcome you to our campus and to our program tonight. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks also to my colleagues, co-workers, and the Murphy student workers who've supported Forrest and CD's visit and invested so much time and energy in it. I'd also like to thank the Hendricks Murphy Foundation in Literature and Language, the sponsor of this event and of many other programs that deepen the experience of literature for Hendricks students and the larger community. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones, and I want to let you know that after the reading there'll be a short Q&A period, and then we'll move to this area in the back for a book signing and refreshments. So we hope that you linger around and talk to CD and Forrest a little bit more, buy a book, and enjoy the reception. It's my great honor this evening to introduce Forrest Gander and CD Wright. I'm afraid I was the one who, in proposing their visit, coined the phrase, or picked up the old coin, husband-wife duo. What I was trying to do, or as my students say, what I was going for, was to remind our generous but ever-vigilant underwriters that in having not one but two Murphy visiting poets this year, each illustrious, each prolific, and who happen to be married to each other, we're getting a lot of bang for our buck. I think with husband-wife duo, though, I inadvertently conjured the idea of some kind of dynamic duo, as if they're going to be doing something involving a trapeze or a trick piano. I'm thinking I need to rephrase my claim and dub them something that has a lot of currency at Hendricks these days, a husband-wife dyad. The term has meanings in multiple disciplines. A group of two, a couple, a pair. From biology, a secondary morphological unit consisting of two monads. From chemistry, an element, atom, or group having a valence of two. From mathematics, two vectors with no symbol connecting them. And from sociology, two persons involved in an ongoing relationship or interaction, be the relationship or interaction itself. This range of meanings is questing and eclectic like Forrest and CD's minds and work. It also points to the integrity and distinction of each element of the pair. Forrest, a native of California, has degrees in geology and literature. He authored several collections of poetry as well as a novel and a book of essays. His 2011 book, Core Samples from the World, was a finalist for both the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award. He has also published translations of poetry. CD, who was born in Mountain Home and moved to Harrison when she was 6, has published a dozen poetry collections, and her most recent book, One with Others, won the 2010 National Book Critics Circle Award in Poetry and the Lenore Marshall Award, and was a finalist for the National Book Award. She and Forrest teach at Brown University. I give you now this dynamic dyad, CD Wright and Forrest Gander.
Thank you. It's great to be back in Arkansas. It's always great to be back in Arkansas. We're going to go back and forth, and Forrest is going to include some video in his presentation. I'm going to read a little bit from a little book called 40 Watts, very short poems, and kind of read like every other one. They're just little sort of like country and western things. I don't know what they are exactly, 40 watts. And then when I return, I'll read a bit from One with Others, a little book of her days, which is set in eastern Arkansas in 1969, 1 year after Martin Luther King's assassination. and having to do with events that took place in one of the little towns in the Delta, Arkansas Delta, in that following year. This is a different thing, 40 watts. Poem with evening coming on. A dog has appeared at the gate for the second day in a row against a dirty peach sky. A single car wobbles into the sun. Light bulb poem. At 4 o'clock, I am at the door with a bare hand of snow. Laughing shamelessly, I undo my shirt. We'll pick up at the next chapter, my beloved, are the words of the rambler. If not the words, the substance. The snow smeared across my front, warm to the touch, though we remain separated as if by a chair, and I unwilling to read ahead. Country station poem. It goes something like this. When the dog lunged, she froze, he fired at the head. They drove around, they came back, he wore black. They line danced, they drank, they fell down. They swore allegiance to the women who bore them. They cursed the women who bore them. The chambers of the heart opened and shut. They made plans, they made plans. Amarillo poem. A room across from a sporting house. With the dark, I watched a woman washing the men off, then herself she washed with a different cloth. It was fall, as I recall, sitting on my bed in my flame-proof gown. Every morning I had to jump aboard my suitcase to get it to close. Poem in which blood flows. They are like brothers, but they know no filial feeling and keep things in culverts. As the tires on their trucks sink into the heavy loam, they spill out of the pool hall's green light into a plashing crescendo of blades. Day-old widow poem. He smiles as if, but is not breathing. A moment ago, he was in his chair, reading. She was lighting the fire. She thought she heard a book drop to the floor. He didn't answer. In an instant, she sensed it, a tangible space across an opening. She could neither enter nor fill, as if his eye hit upon a passage, elegant and cruel and true. Poem of a houseboat stranded in a field. You have a beautiful white dresser, a quilt made by hand, and a cat who follows you inside and out. I've brought a liter of burgundy and the sheet music you ordered. Do you even know how fortunate you are? Come on now, girl, give us a little smile. Show us those teeth. Her Toes poem. A ladder left out all winter, a wasp nest in a cornice, a rag mop, and a girl they called Birdie. Due to their dark hues, her clothes seem heavy and dense. Her feet have not put on the shoes, huddled together by the bed. We are already in position in the upper branches. For a backdrop, her sheets wrinkled stiff on the line. Poem Waiting for Sleep. On a night like this, craven, cavernous, all certainties desert her. The fire is dying. The fire is dead. Deep down, deep inside, she sees nothing. Soldier's Home poem. She has been driving since she woke up, but she is lost now. in a tangle of trees, the overbearing smear of greens, then an unmarked lane of poplars, a man on a bench of indeterminate years, missing most of one side of him. Poem with a dead tree. It is late afternoon. She avoids looking in its direction. She could feel it moving toward her in shaky black lines. Poem with no up or down. She is telling her husband that he is dead, and he is telling her he is no such thing. She tells him where he is buried, and he assures her that he is seated directly across the table from her. She tells him she is going to call their son and settle this. Then he'll need to cough up some dollars for rent. Poem in which every other line is a falsehood. They walk around in the stubble of the field sharing a wine sap. After he cut his firewood, he liked to sit on a big log and listen to his blood rush. She turns her head in time to see a flat iron float through an open window. Poem with a girl almost 15. A name is scribbled over and over in a notebook. A nest set fire to. Larvae chew wool in a drawer. The hen rides her shoulder to the mailbox. Poem in which her mortgage comes due. The folds of a dark brown dress, the knuckles of a hand spent in dishwater, the jars of rhubarb, the folios of poetry, the suitcase filled with worthless notes, the fiery fields, the fields on fire. Poem without angel food. Well, a great many things have been said in the oven of ours. We have not been shaken out of the magnolias today. It was another hard day, and tomorrow will be harder. Well, that sounds like our gong, but we'll have the boy's birthday, and we will have music and cake. Well, I think I will think only good thoughts and go up and talk to the rock. Poem of a forest of clouds sweeping by. Your life blew past as a shirt off a line, but then turned and turned again. Oh, archangel of the mirror, what would you have done? It's been said that over the years, the house sustained the smell of fresh-cooked trout, and the rest, as we well know, is still journeying.
I'm the monad Forrest Gander. And I'm also really happy to be back in Arkansas, where, in fact, I was married and worked as a waiter and in Eureka Springs and for a little press there. I want to call your attention. There's a really terrific show I saw today of collaborative work of photographs and voices by Anna Goldberg and Maxine Payne. At what building is that? Mills, yeah. And I really recommend that you look at it. And I want to thank people I've been working with here, the students that I've gotten to speak with and eat with, and Tyrone Jagger, and Henrietta Venneman, and Geffen Maupin, whose classes I met, and especially Hope Coulter. Thank you for bringing me here. I'm very interested in international literatures and in translation, and I'd like to start with a poem by a Mexican poet named Alfonso de Quino. And he's a poet who lives outside Coyoacan in the desert, and he's very familiar with. He's a very isolated person. Knows the plants, the medicinal values, knows all the stars. Very sort of ecologically centered poet. And this poem, which is part of a collection coming out next year, or actually this year, actually like in a month, from Copper Canyon, called Fungus, Skull, Eye, Wing, Selected Poems of Alfonso de Quino, can be read in multiple ways. So there's a rift in the middle of the poem, and you can read across that caesura, that rift, and it makes sense, or you can just read down either side, and it makes sense. So it was a really hard thing to translate. I'm going to read in Spanish, just down one side, and then I'm going to read across in English. Fronda. No tiene ninguna forma la hoja en medio de las hojas. Las hojas no son el aire, sino el aire que lo copa, y una copa cabe en otra dentro de una sola hoja. Movimiento de la fronda que desvela otra rosa, y una en otra se transforma como un cielo entre dos hojas. Invisible rama loca se retuerce por sí sola, si una hoja y otra hoja siempre son la misma hoja. And now in English, across. Frond. It's formless. From within the leaves I see the middle of the leaf in the middle, one brushing another of the leaves that keeps it company. Leaves aren't the alder, all the tree a leaf, but the air that holds all the alder in its sleeve, and more leaves. And trees drink each other in, and a frond emerges from one of them, tangled in the branches, a singular leaf among the leaves. Gesticulation of the frond, from within its patterns I see, disclosing in the shadowed bower another flower, the other flower. And each moves into the other, and the phylum transfloresces like a sky, invisibly woven and between two leaves, opening out. Wild, invisible branch, the stalk and the corolla twisting, spirals darkening into one form and digging in one leaf and another leaf, from the unseen branch, always are, to the shade of this leaf, the same leaf, falling broken. Okay, that's Alfonso de Quino. And I'm going to read a poem now that's a collaboration with two dancers named Kyoko and Koma, who come out of the Buto tradition. And we did a little book together that came out recently called after the dancers Kyoko and Koma. And I know, so one of the things poetry can do is describe things, and this isn't that kind of poem. And this poem, I'm really not trying to describe their dance, but really trying to make words act out the kind of thing that they do. Faithfulness. A life might change. A person's life might change with a gesture or shaping phrase, an albumum flare, and gentleness from which gestate bodies wake supple odd as an oyster. Her nostrils' dilation, slow contraction of his ribs, breeze in the mulch life breath. As she clutches herself, his thumb palpates her jaw and neck. Marmoreal contour, the long curving spine trough, each lumbar vertebrae, one by one, distinguishable, undulations blade out from his shoulders, her everted heel drawn up by ligaments in her calf, so between them space, a universe in zygote, might be reconceived as a means of access, flesh realm, blind finding flesh blindly, feeling forward the apical arm, spasms in pre-light, feet flat under her hips, palms down, the whole frame lifting ventral upward and buckling as though newborn or unused to this weight or sequence, a tendon behind the synovial bursa, exquisitely, testing its range, leg folded under her body, swaying, rises again, spavined thighs, elbows incurved against the joint, probing air with his face, his lissom trunk dragged forward on arm-pinned, shoulder stumps, broken momentums, thigh waves from pelvic socket as they fall awkward to proscenium, clavicle pockets of shadow, open-mouthed, foot cocked, their heads arched back on throats rhymed, mouth and eyes capsized, and four buttocks, a madrigal pair, shifting equilibrium of force as he disencoils her waist, a fountain, her nape goes slack, and hair sweeps the floor, such solemnity in becoming aware of emotion, while silence chews edges of water, sound, night, wind, his hands, ardent, vulnerable, great toe withdrawn from the immensity of contact, clockwork, articulate, fan-fingered, imploring first figures, spent and mutual with a world, two bodies releasing the event. And then I'm going to finish this section with, by the way, Carolyn said we're going to be going back and forth. It's not going to be like all night long going back and forth. It's just going to happen once, in case you're getting worried. And now I think I'm going to show a little 2-minute, 50-second film.
The hugeness of that which is missing. Call the direction the eye is looking, the line of sight. There, where it grazes the surface of the visibly surging, without reference to a field of human presence, don't look away. I haven't looked away. The neurons spike quickly, and the catastrophe will be consummated even to the end, to the absence of ambiguity, a new range of feeling. Torn awake. What if a man went into his house and leaned his hand against the wall, and the wall was not? Look how your relation to truth creates a tension you have slackened with compromise. Yes, and the more distant it is, the more I have valued it. But to stand where the crossing happens, as fall oaks fold into lake light, and so, wearing reflection, take a further step inside. No, the voice said, you will strike out into a forest of pain, unpathed, wolved, clouds muffling the mountain ridge and spilling down in runnels, at variance with, measuring out an exile between self and self, driven transverse. Nevertheless, you will begin to arrive, to know from intimate impulse the crucial experience of, the threat of dissolution of, but not yet. There is something more than rhythms of distance and presence, of more quality than the set of qualities determining figure and ground and suffering, where respite is so often misinterpreted as a horizon. Isn't the word for a turn of phrase itself a turn of phrase? Something was given to me as a present, and a specter was attached to me, pregnant with equivocation. And in the throat of language, and in early June riots of starlings, and in some crumbs in the seam of a book, the solid real steps out from infinitely diluted experience, saying, "Tongue, I gave you, eyes." At any point in the trajectory, the body might stop. Do you recall this part? But who is it that is speaking in the glorious, unstrung light?
I think after this, Forrest is going to finish with another short film, and so I don't know up there in the sound booth if you have the capacity to dim the lights during the film, but film is best seen in the dark. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to read a bit from One with Others, a little book of her days, which is set in East Arkansas, 1969, as I mentioned before. It was intended as a tribute to a friend of mine, a woman I met when I was in my teens, a very iconoclastic and subduable, literary, smart, self-taught, hilarious, furious woman who was living in the Arkansas Delta with her husband, with whom she was completely incompatible, and their 7 children, which put considerable pressure on that circumstance. So when her town exploded in 1969, as many other towns did in various manifestations in the wake of Dr. King's death, my friend, Miss Vidito, who was a white woman, became very involved in this. She was the only white woman or white person to do so, and so of course there was a price to pay. Her husband denounced her on the radio and divorced her and took custody of the 7 children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you ask her about it, she would say, "It was the most alive I ever felt in my life." This was her moment. She stepped into it with great courage and grace. But this is toward the end of this text. And so I give you that context because it's toward the end. It was hotter then. It was darker. No, sir, it was whiter. Just pick up a paper. You would never suspect 66% of the population was invisible. You would never even suspect any of its people were non-white until an elusive Negro was arrested in Chicago, or the schedule for the annual Negro Fair was published, or a popular Negro social studies teacher was fired for an insubordinate letter to the superintendent, and a spontaneous rebellion sprang up in a Negro classroom in the form of flying chairs and raggedy books and a pop bottle thrown at a light fixture, and then the list of long-suffered degradations backed up and overflowed. Parades without permits, boycotted stores, funeral home turned into a freedom center, kids arrested en masse and put in a swimming pool. V died during Operation Enduring Freedom. A bottle a day, she got annihilated. 2 packs a day. Always preoccupied with last things. Always a touch eschatological. Always took a little tabula rasa with her caffeine. When I asked the neighbor if she knew the woman who lived there in 1969, "Oh yes," she said, "she knew her. She didn't trust me, and I didn't trust her." I don't blame her, though. Everything was so confusing. She stayed to herself. She was so overwhelmed, that poor woman. She was right. We were wrong. Vindication. They've got souls, just like you and me. Interposition and nullification. The marchers are approaching the town of Hazen, where not so long ago an earth scraper turned up a mastodon skull and a tusk on the old military road. In Big Tree, people are turning in. One sure thing were the prices. Grown-ups know the cost of a head of lettuce, a fryer, a package of thighs, a $500 bag of seed. $1 bag of seed covers about 5 acres. It takes 20 square feet of cotton for a medium-sized blouse. Where nothing is planted, nothing much grows. The dirt is hard-packed. The trees were gone by the first war. The first to go, the most marvelous one, the red cypress, made beautiful instruments. The fields not gone, but empty. Cotton turned to soybeans. Mussels from the river turned to salvage, fishing for tires on the silted up river. Some are left digging an old burr out of their foot. Some go up, some go down. Big Tree church sign. A race-free conversation hard to have back then. Back then, the hot dog wagon doubled as a brothel. Come again? Dear Abby, I am 11 years old, but I know all the facts of life because I live in a dirty neighborhood. My problem is that in our family we get pregnant quick. My sister got pregnant when she was 16 just by sitting next to a boy in church. Can this be? Dear young miss, no, somebody must have moved. People study the dingy chenille clouds for a sign. People did what they have done. A town, a time, and a woman who lived there, and left undone what they ought not to have did. I take one more drive across town thinking about the retired welding teacher, easing over that rise, seeing the parking lot full of white men. I wonder if he thought he would die in the jungle where no Viet Cong ever called him N-word, or he would die in front of the bowling alley without ever having been inside, or die in the swimming pool without ever having been in it except when drained and the police had him in their sights, or if because he was a young man, he would never die. I attach V to my driving around thoughts. An object unworthy of love, she thought she was. It was a cri de coeur. Those of our get had given her a nom de guerre, V. A simple act to join a march against fear down an old military road. We were watching an old movie the night the table started walking toward us, and there was trouble on division. She became a disaffiliated member of her race. I'm one of them now, she said upon release from jail. I'm an invader. To feel in conjunction with the changes of my time, the most alive I've ever been. My body lifted itself from the chair. It walked to where I saw a silent crowd. To act, just to act, that is the glorious thing. Yet it has come to my attention that a whisper campaign has been directed against the main character, an invisible woman. She could have buried her feelings like power lines, walked around free and common as the air that bathes the globe, or sued the chicken shits and gone to live in Provence, smelling of Gauloise and café au lait. You have your life until you use it. You forfeit the only life you know, or go to your grave with the song curdled inside you. No more damned if you did, and damned if you didn't. Not the mental lethargy in which the days enveloped her, nor the depleted breast, not the hand that never knew tenderness, nor eyes that glistened, not the people dragging canvas bags through the ragged fields, not the high, mean whine of mosquitoes, not another year of shoe-top cotton, no more white buck shoes for Henry, no peaches this year on the ridge, and no other elevation around to coast another mile out of the tank, no eel in Longueuil, not the aphrodisiac of crossing over, not the hole in the muffler circling the house, not a shot of whiskey before a piece of bread, not to live anymore as a distended beast, not the lying in again, not the suicide of the goldfish, not the father's DTs, not the map of no-name islands in the river, not the car burning in the parking lot, not the sound but the shape of the sound, not the clouds rucked up over the clothesline, the copperhead and the coleus, not the air hung with malathion, not the boomerang of bad feelings, not stacks of poetry, long-playing albums, the visions of Goya and friends, not to be resuscitated, and absolutely no priest up on our elbows. The priests confound you, and then they confound you again. They only come clear when you're on your deathbed. We must speak by the card, or equivocation will undo us. Look into the dark heart, and you will see what the dark eats other than your heart. The world is not ineluctably finished. Though the watchfires have been doused, more walls have come down, more walls are being built. Sound of the future, uncanny, how close to the sound of the old. At Daddy's eyes, pusherman, still on the jukebox. Everybody's past redacted. What to say to the woman given a folded flag who could not sit and order a soda in the drugstore, to the druggist who pulled the stools out by the roots still open for business, to the man living in Reno now retired who was arrested, wrongly charged, tried, convicted, sentenced, picked him up one summer evening when he was on his bicycle making deliveries for the drugstore. Then they let him out one night, drove him home, told him to go, just go. His family collected cash. His mother made food for the journey. He took a bus to California, didn't know a living soul. People were wearing purple pants. Or the man and his sons, one son already a veteran, beaten by men from all the farms around. They were waiting for them outside the jailhouse. They turned off the jailhouse lights and let them loose. He knew every one of them. He fixed flats for the farm, so he knew every blasted one of them. His sons took off. One jumped from an overpass. The father beaten so badly he lost an eye. He was given hot coffee at the hospital. A nurse said, if anyone comes in you can't name, you throw this coffee at them. Anyone. Your people will be here in no time. You have to go to Memphis. What to say to the kids now scattered on Social Security, passed out of this life, or looking after parents, grandchildren, still working a dead-end job, who were arrested, taken in school buses, then in sealed trucks and put in the drain pool. Kids, sealed trucks, put in a cement hole in the ground, held at gunpoint for 3 days, parents half out of their minds. It's paved over now, a parking lot. But the pump house isn't gone, just overgrown. I had my friend photograph the pump house, its ghost anyway. The photographer sees a snake and scrambles up the bank with her tripod. Mr. Easter, probably a rat snake. I'm about like you, though, about a snake all these years on the river. I only saw a poison one about 3 times. The wife was afraid of spiders, but she'd skin the snakes people would bring her for her hat band, belts, and whatnot. I'd say, take that out on the porch. I don't want a thing to do with them. When the wife was alive, she kept it beautiful. She loved flowers. I don't do nothing but fish. Used to dive for mussels, then salvage. Later the same day, we met a city worker, retired, who said he once killed a cottonmouth on the streets, sold it to a restaurant owner for $1, who skinned, filleted, and served it back to him on a platter. Later, the same evening, we met a bartender who told us only 4 people in history sweat blood, and they were all women. It is a place flowing over with its peculiar feeling. Thank you.
So I'm going to finish just with this one poem. It takes about 6.5 minutes to read. And it's also a collaboration, but with a photographer named Lucas Folia, who went around the country interacting and photographing people who live in what are called in intentional communities, what we used to call utopian communities, people who live completely off the grid, and for various reasons, political, religious, and more peculiar than that. From very small, like 8 people communities, one of the first people you'll see is part of a community of people that don't kill any animals or pluck any fruit or vegetables. They only eat roadkill and things that have fallen to the ground. That's things that fall to the ground. And they have an ethical basis for this community. So I listened to hundreds of hours of tapes. Lucas would go in and live with these people for weeks at a time before he would photograph them. And he would interview them, and I listened to tapes. And despite the variety of kinds of communities, there were a lot of similar kinds of statements that people made about their lives and about the choices that they'd made to live off the grid. And from their words, I made this poem, which is called Moving Around for the Light, a madrigal. And the music is by a wonderful musician, lives in Virginia, named Brady Earnhardt.
The natural order of things. Sugar bushing. Some things we do would gross people out because they just don't know. Always was baffled by the connections in life. It's moving around for the light. I thought, that plant's growing before my eyes. It's insane. What the news media don't want you to know about. All the wild, edible plants, for instance. Getting on good here, blacks and white. No fossil fuel-based technology. I've eaten owl, wing mussels, and leg mussels. That's the only meat on him. All this roadkill, beavers, otters, deer, raccoon. We cook them up, preserve the hide instead of slashing it. Got it laid out real clear. A lot can be done with duct tape. A bucket of honey between May and August. Who controls oil controls the world. It's a lawyer's racket, but they don't go by law. That's the truth, and people don't even know it. Want to find my bearings and what's real. Started an anarchist collective with 13 others, like myself, independent people. Mountains seem to draw folks who want to live in wilderness. The biggest problems come from being disconnected. I did really well in school, but I didn't like it. How do you sustain yourself day to day? Take 5 milk goats and a sack of sweet potatoes, a grist mill, a harness shop. Most people independent enough to live out here like this. They're too independent to listen to each other. Feed somebody lunch and they cut your wood all year. That works. Until the kids are grown, don't want to bring others in on account of influence. Some things we do would gross people out because they don't know. Where do you think you come by your pattern for your axe handle? Take your old axe handle and lay it on there. Nobody comes in, nobody leaves. We'll mind ourselves, let us alone. They wear people out so they say, I'll just pay the fine. That's the truth, and people don't even know it. I was on her windshield, 20 or 30 feet, and then she hit the brakes, and I flew into a telephone pole. Heard a lot of stories about people's lives, who needs a house, and how much tin. We're different, you can't treat us the same. Garlic, pumpkin, onion, squirrel, and people come to learn to make sorghum. Those that have enough guts to live off the land, they are independent people like myself, but I lived in community, lived with the Amish. With them, wood cutting isn't cutting wood. Wood's a byproduct. That's why you can't use chainsaws. You can't talk to someone over a chainsaw. Want to move in a way that's more connected. See the cause and effect in my life. Right at the start of my senior year, a natural progression from activism and travel. How do you sustain yourself day to day? And people come to learn to make sorghum. What the news media don't want you to know. Those dogs, they're rabbit dogs. Like to lose that feeling of being a foreigner, find a sense of being at home. Out felling trees alone on a windy day, took my eyes off it for 3 seconds. A big gust of wind came up and blew it down on me. My first thought was, oh shit, I don't have insurance, which is a funny thought, considering. Let's get this process right. I'm not quitting unless I feel in my heart I'm going to quit. That's the difference between me and other people. Blue heron is good, tastes good. Ever eat a blue heron? The supervisor said there's no common law in Virginia. We don't know how fast it's going to happen. Food's going to be number one. Next is going to be ammo. We figure we'll end up feeding a lot of people. Took my eye off it for 3 seconds. First thought was, oh shit. It's a right. It's always been a right. The difference between me and other people. We'll care for ourselves. Let us alone. I've got it laid out real clear. Biggest problems come from being disconnected. Beavers, otters, deer, raccoon. I've eaten owl. Hard to feed yourself for a year. Milk goats are the most valuable thing you can have. Banks go down, people can't get money. They're going to see what they need. Food's number one, and next is going to be ammo. If bad goes to worse, we'll post a man to keep out strangers. Working to get that other doctor to move here. Like in Vietnam, killing those women and kids, that's not the American mindset. But I think it might come to such. Tanning hides, fire without matches. When others won't, we'll make it. Take 5 milk goats and a sack of sweet potatoes. You can go anywhere. The natural order of things is where the species gets dominant over its niche. I'm always baffled by the connections. That plant's growing before my eyes. It's insane. Instantly felt comfortable here. Skinned my first raccoon and it looked so much like a fetus I cried. Don't know how fast it's going to happen or if it'll happen, but if it doesn't happen, we're not hurting either way. Grew up using a bow and arrow to shoot rabbits. Need to be around like-minded people so I can see the cause and effect in my life. They're really strong personalities. I have a strong personality too. Nobody comes in, nobody leaves. Ever eat a blue heron? Natural order of things. Wing muscles and leg muscles, that's the only meat on it. Where do you think you come by your pattern? Let's get this process right. Want to find my bearings and what's real. Move in a way that's more connected.
Okay, well, he's wondering where V came from. Her married name was Vidito. At the time, shortly after I met her, she was reading Pynchon's V, and I think that's where it came from. That's all there was to it. Yeah. I knew her from the time I was 17 until her death in 2000 and, what did I say, 4 or 6? So I knew her a long time. Yeah. She eventually ended up in Hell's Kitchen in New York, where for the first time in her life she wasn't a freak. She was just V. Yeah. She was taught by the Ursuline nuns through high school, and she attended part of one semester of college. She dropped out because she was pregnant.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, poets have been, and writers have been criticized for writing about things that they supposedly can't imagine. A man writing from a woman's point of view, a white person writing from a black person's point of view. But if our imaginations aren't capable of fully entering another being, then we're really isolated and lost in a kind of solipsism. So I think the imagination gives us a right to try to do anything, but you can do things really badly and botch them.
No, I think you can write about anything that you can pull off, and the risk is that you won't pull it off, and that people will either not be interested or be offended, or I don't know. I think the pleasure of writing is choosing difficult subjects. That's one of the pleasures.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in poetry as the anti-spectacle also, as I'm really deeply, deeply moved by the intimate space of just the page. But I'm also interested in the whole hog of how literature might happen in translation and every kind of form and genre in between forms. And of course, film is so much a part of our lives, and so I'm really interested in exploring that as well. I'd like to do some more of them. I don't know really what to do with them. You can't publish them. They're not going to be at a local theater near here, but they satisfy me creatively.
Well, this is about form and creation, and the form of one with others. I just go at it every which way, and I felt like the forms that I found for one with others, which includes some passages that are lineated, some passages that use quite a lot of space, and others that are in paragraphs, and it includes dialogue. It includes Dear Abby columns and advertisements from the newspaper. It was all to try to create a context and to create texture of that time and that place, that moment, and not just to create a character of my friend. So, I mean, I think... for me, I'm very interested in form, but for me it arises out of the material at hand. I've always liked voices, I've always liked accents, idiom, the vernacular, but I like all levels of diction. Experimental is not a totally useful term for me. I mean, a term that sort of came out of when people got tired of saying, oh, so-and-so's an experimentalist, is exploratory. And I think I prefer that writing is an exploratory activity. Yeah.
it's that act of becoming strange to yourself and going to a place and meeting people who are really different from you, so that you see yourself in a really different way, that you become the foreigner. That's really a profound sort of ethical experience, as well as perceptual and linguistic experience. So most of the travel, I guess, that the places that I've returned to the most are in Latin America, and I feel really enriched by experience. For instance, the Aymara in Bolivia. It's the majority population of La Paz in Bolivia. The Aymara is the only culture that's been studied for whom the future is behind them, and the past they consider in front of them. And the word for the future is the same word as back. The word for past is the same word they use for I and for forward. When they talk about the past, they move their arms forward. When they talk about the future, they move their arms back. And their linguistic experience, it's impossible in the Aymara language to say something like Columbus discovered America in 1492. You can't say a sentence like that, because every sentence has to be grounded in whether you actually witnessed it or you overheard this. Those are the only two ways of qualifying a sentence. And that very act of sort of qualifying things with personal experience may have to do with the larger conceptual idea of placing the past, which you can see clearly, which you have some visual sense of in front of you, and the unknowable future behind you. So experiences like that are transformative.
I don't know. I mean, poetry has a lot to do with the senses anyway. What doesn't? I mean, we inform each other. We know each other's work very well. We steal books from each other. We steal words from each other. We critique each other. So, of course, we influence each other. Our work is actually, though, never compared. So we know how to get out of each other's way, too.
Helen's really good with images, much better than I am. And she used to write, when she started writing, she was really fantastic with analogies. Love is like cola, it can burn a hole clean through you. Hope is a pillow, hold on. She got really good at analogies and metaphors, so good that at one point she completely stopped. She thought, I know how to do this. It's like that album that Radiohead did without any guitars. That you're a rock band. What would it be like to do an album without using rock guitars? And she taught herself other things that way. Meanwhile, I never taught myself other things and never got even to that level of image. I'm terrible with analogies.